Hello, my name is Patrick Forrest, and I'm here today with my co-founder of Quest for Justice, Binh Dang, to discuss the need for a pro se support system. First, Binh, let's start with the obvious question, which is, can you explain what a pro se support system is?
Sure. So a pro se, specifically the term pro se litigant, stands for someone who represents themselves in court. A pro se support system is a tool used by the pro se litigant to manage a dispute from end to end. This means he uses it at the beginning to figure out what legal issues he has. This also means he uses it at the end to present his case to the court.
So what about the argument that legal aid organizations and pro bono attorney services, they already provide pro se litigants with help?
They do exist, and they do provide some pro se litigant with help. What they don't do is they don't help litigants who do not qualify for the income requirements, and there aren't enough of them to help the litigants who do qualify.
So then explain to us what the necessary components of a pro se support system are.
So it should provide them with, at minimum, 4 components. The first one is legal information, so that they don't have to go to 5 different places to learn about the law. It should provide them with thinking tools because civil litigation is complicated. It should give them access to outsourced legal services, and it should give them tools that they can use to present their case to the judge.
Okay, so let's go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. Maybe let's start with the first one, which is the first piece, which is legal information.
So knowledge is power. This means that pro se litigants need to understand the law in order to be able to have an effect on the challenges, on the legal challenges that they're facing. So more specifically, they need to understand their rights, the language of legal terms used by the people they're asking for help to protect those rights. And they also need to understand the process that they need to follow to work with those people. And those people, I mean, court judges, clerks, people in the court system.
Okay, so a pro se support system must provide the litigant with legal information. Can you give us examples of what you mean by this?
Sure. So, for example, one of the most important legal concepts for litigants to learn is cause of action. The plaintiff's success depends on them being able to prove that the cause of action exists, whereas the defendant's success depends on them proving that the plaintiff have failed to satisfy their burden. However, since there are many cause of actions that could be pursued in court, but only one applies to a particular situation, the pro se support system must not waste the user's time with information about irrelevant causes of action. The function of the system is to provide litigants with just the legal information needed to get justice in court for their specific dispute, not to obtain a law degree. This means the system should allow the user to filter out irrelevant legal information from their view. For another example would be when litigants starts interacting with court employees or other legal professionals, they will encounter legal terms such as service of process or even witness impeachment. It's important for the litigants to be familiar with these terms so that they know how to interact in a way that would benefit them. While the courts have made a lot of effort to become more pro se litigant friendly, the responsibility ultimately still falls into the hands of the litigants to enforce their rights.
Okay, so we've talked about the first component of the pro se support system, which is legal information, and how that information is important, and that information be tailored to the cause of action that the user is operating under, and they helps them understand their case, and they can identify evidence, the evidence that is necessary for their case. Let's talk a little bit about the next component, which is thinking tools. Can you explain thinking tools to us?
In a dispute, the litigants need to make a lot of decisions. They need to answer questions like, should I just let this go? Should I fight in court or settle with the other side? If I fight, can I win? Can I collect if I win? What impact will the litigation process have on me financially and emotionally? For many pro se litigants, this would be their first and possibly only legal case. They may not have a structure or be aware of the things that they need to consider to arrive at the right answer for them. For example, to the question of can I win? This will require the litigants to evaluate the timeline and supporting evidence to determine if it will satisfy the elements of the cause of action. A thinking tool would guide the plaintiff to analyze the facts of the case and to help that person provide an estimate on whether they have provided sufficient evidence to prove all the elements of the cause of action. Alternatively, a thinking tool could provide or guide the defendant to analyze the facts of the case and to arrive at a conclusion on whether the plaintiff would be able to muster sufficient facts to prove all the elements. The burden of proof is on the plaintiff. The plaintiff must prove all the elements, not just most of them. By guiding the defendant to think about the plaintiff case on an element by element basis, they will be able to draw a conclusion on the strength of the plaintiff's case. Now, if you have an attorney, the attorney will help you with this, but if you don't, then you are responsible for doing this, and a tool can help you through that process. So basically, just like jury instructions are a type of thinking tool designed to help non-lawyers, laymen in the jury, draw legal conclusions, the pro se support system should also provide the layman litigants with thinking tools to help them draw conclusions about their own case.
Yeah, I think that jury instructions example is a great example of thinking tools that exist and how we can kind of expand upon that work with the pro se support system. So let's talk about the next component, which is outsource legal services. As a lawyer, one of the advantages I have is being able to easily access third-party professional services to help with complex administrative tasks. So that would be something like making sure the other side is properly notified of the lawsuit against them. If I have documents or evidence that isn't in English, making sure that it's translated, or having those translation services to translate them into English, and being able to translate legal terms, and then services that help you certify and track different documents. Lawyers use these third-party services all the time to save us time and money, but nothing exists right now in a comprehensive way for self-represented litigants. So how does a pro se support system overcome some of these barriers regarding accessing outsourced legal services for self-represented litigants?
So these services, like service and process providers, exist to help lawyers reduce their costs and reduce their errors to satisfy these legal requirements. These providers don't market themselves to self-represent litigants. It's just not economical for them to do it. A pro se support system can fix or bridge that economic gap, let's call it that, by bringing those services and, well, first by educating the pro se litigant on the existence of those services and the value that they can bring. The system can also bridge the economic gap by making it easy and affordable for the litigant to order the services from providers that have been vetted for quality and price. Now, just because a litigant chooses to forego the use of a lawyer doesn't mean that they also choose to forego the use of third-party services that their lawyers uses to make their life easier.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, so let's talk about the fourth piece, the last piece of the pro se support system, which is the trial presentation. A trial presentation is something every good lawyer will create for the judge, but nothing exists for self-represented litigants. Do you agree that the trial presentation is by far the most difficult and important piece of the pro se puzzle?
Most definitely. Every great lawyer knows that preparation is what they need to do to be successful in presenting their case to the judge. And unfortunately, in a previous conversation that we had, you've identified that a lot of pro se litigants get their conception about how courts work from watching court TV. And they can't just go to court and wing it and expect good things to happen. Preparation is also key, and they need to take it seriously. So it's very important that the litigant prepare for their case by having a comprehensive representation that they can give to the judge, give to the other side, and also use in the presentation of the case. So the presentation should contain, at minimum, a clear timeline. This is the narrative of the story. This is where to lay out the facts so that the judge can form a conclusion regarding what happened, right? Another important component are the supporting evidence to give credibility to the timeline, to the testimony. If both parties tell the same testimony, great, there is no issue. If there are contradictions between the two testimony, then the judge will be relying on what they see in terms of how the litigant present themselves, but also any evidence that they provide to draw the conclusion as to what is true. For the plaintiff, they should also provide in the presentation a page or two about how their damages are calculated. So for example, if it's a loan, it's not just a loan amount. If there's interest, there may be a table that display the calculations of the loan amount increasing with the failure to pay and the accruing interest. On the other hand, if it's a defendant litigant, and let's say the dispute isn't on whether there's a breach of contract, but the defendant can't pay the damages in a lump sum, and so what the defendant's looking for is a payment plan, then the defendant will have a stronger argument if they bring an explanation justifying why a payment plan would be necessary and why a payment plan would be better for the plaintiff at ensuring that they get paid back. So for example, the defendant could bring information on their income, their current debt load. The judge can then figure out what is a reasonable additional amount to add to their monthly payment that are used to pay for debt, their existing debt and this new judgment debt that would allow them to eventually pay down the judgment. So rather than right now where the judge really doesn't have that information, and so he's blind from being able to craft a more just settlement agreement for both parties. So so far what I've described the benefits that a pro se litigant would get from a pro se support system. I do also want to point out that the courts will also benefit. What they'll get is they'll have to deal with less hearing delays or rescheduled hearings due to mistakes made by pro se litigants. So for example, if a litigant failed to serve properly, then the judge would have to reschedule a new hearing, and that's just more court time that's wasted. The court trial, so the actual hearing of a case, might go faster if both sides were using a pro se support system, if both sides were bringing a comprehensive, clear, easy to read trial presentation that the judge can process. And so that would result in less time having the judge having to ask questions to extract more information from both parties. So ultimately, the courts will also experience improved productivity by having to deal with less waste created by human error or human ignorance about the legal system.
Yeah, one of the common themes I hear from judges is that better prepared self-represented litigants means less waste of judicial resources. So that absolutely makes sense to me. Okay, well, I think that's everything that you and I wanted to talk about today. We're going to have more conversations like this, talking in greater detail about ways to address the access to justice gap and access to justice barriers in our country. I want to thank everybody for listening and watching today. If you want to learn more about Quest for Justice, please visit us online at q4justice.com. Thank you much.
Thank you.